The ocean. People believe it's just water, but those who have looked deep into its heart know the truth. It's alive. It watches. It chooses. And sometimes, it takes tonight, we bring you 4 terrifying cruise ship horror stories. Not myths. Not legends. Real encounters from the endless sea. Encounters that prove the ocean never forgets its victims. A woman who vanished into thin air. A ballroom that never ends. A ship that became its own grave. As in a fog that hungers for human souls. This isn't just a voyage. It's a descent into darkness. And once you hear these stories, you may never sleep peacefully again. First story. The sea was calm when the grand cruise liner left the harbor, its lights glittering across the waves like a floating city. Families posed for photographs, couples strolled across the open decks, and children ran to the railings to watch dolphins leap alongside the ship. Everything seemed perfect, yet the ocean carried secrets deeper than any passenger could imagine. Among the thousands who boarded, there was one figure no one remembered seeing in the boarding line. No record of her ticket, no cabin assigned to her name. On the third night, as the clock neared midnight, a woman appeared on the upper deck. She was barefoot, her long white gown trailing across the damp wooden boards. Her hair hung loose, strands glistening like wet seaweed, and her skin glowed faintly beneath the deck lights. Crew members who caught sight of her assumed she was simply eccentric, but soon they noticed something unnatural. Each time she passed, the lights flickered, and the sea below shifted violently, churning foam though the wind was still. Lena, a young stewardess, had her first encounter while delivering towels to a supposedly empty luxury suite. She opened the door and found the woman seated at the vanity, brushing her long black hair. The sight froze her in place. No one was assigned to that room. Before she could speak, the woman's reflection turned toward her, though her body did not move. The eyes staring back from the mirror were hollow, as if carved from water. A whisper slipped from her lips, fragile yet echoing like a voice from the bottom of the sea. The ocean never forgets its debts. The mirror cracked from corner to corner, splitting the reflection into fragments. Lena dropped the towels, but when she blinked, the woman was gone. The room was empty, silent, yet her arms were soaked, the towels dripping with seawater that pooled at her feet. Word spread quickly. Passengers began reporting strange sights. A pale figure leaning against their balcony rails, humming in the stairwells, voices rising from nowhere in a language no one could place. A couple woke to the smell of rotting seaweed filling their cabin, their sheets soaked as if they had been dragged across the ocean floor. Crewmen patrolling the lower decks swore they heard deliberate knocking against the hull, as though something outside the ship was trying to get in. The captain dismissed the rumors as superstition, but he could not deny the failures in navigation. At midnight, the compasses spun wildly, digital screens froze, and radios filled with static. Chief Officer Ramirez began combing through the passenger manifest to reassure himself that everything was in order. He found no record of the mysterious woman, but at the very bottom of the document, written in dripping black ink though the pages were printed days earlier, was a name he recognized immediately: Evelyn Moreau. Cabin 616, Ramirez's blood ran cold. Evelyn Moreau had vanished decades ago on this very ship during its maiden voyage. She was reported as lost at sea. Her body never recovered. Her story buried in silence to protect the cruise line's reputation. Yet her name had written itself back into existence, as if the sea demanded she remain a passenger forever. The haunting grew darker when a child went missing. 7-year-old Aaron had been asleep, his parents swore, but by morning his bed was empty. The sheets were wet with salt water, small footprints tracked toward the balcony, and the glass door was open to the endless black horizon. Passengers searched every hallway, every lifeboat, every storage room, but the boy was gone, vanished as though claimed by the waves. That night some swore they saw him holding the hand of the woman in white, both standing at the far end of the deck, gazing silently into the sea. Panic began to spread. Families locked themselves in cabins. Crew whispered about mutiny. The captain withdrew to his quarters, pulling out old logs no one else had ever seen. They told of Evelyn's disappearance, not a storm, not an accident, but a scandal. Witnesses claimed she was pushed into the sea during a jealous quarrel. The owners silenced the truth, erasing her name from records, pretending she never existed. But the ocean, vast and merciless, had not forgotten. On the 7th night, the haunting reached its peak. Lena, trembling but curious, stepped onto the starboard deck. She froze in horror. Pale hands were rising from the waves, dozens at first, then hundreds clutching the rails, dripping with black water. Faces surfaced next, waterlogged and eyeless, pressing against the windows, their mouths gaping silently as if screaming underwater. The ship groaned under the weight of their presence, tilting ever so slightly, as though invisible forces were dragging it downward. Passengers screamed. Crew tried to restrain the chaos, but the woman in white appeared again, standing calmly amid the panic, her eyes empty, her gown clinging to her body as though she had just stepped from the depths. She raised her hand and the sea surged higher, waves slamming against the ship. Her voice rose above the storm, echoing across every deck, seeping into every cabin. Debts must be paid. The drowned are never alone. Lena felt the floor shudder beneath her as water burst through the lower corridors. Lights failed one by one, plunging the ship into darkness. Amid the chaos, she saw Evelyn's reflection not in a mirror, but in every surface of water. The puddles on the floor, the windows streaming with rain, even the terrified eyes of the passengers. The drowned were inside now, their wet footsteps echoing in the halls, their whispers rattling in the vents. And then the child's laughter echoed through the storm. Aaron's voice, playful and bright, drifting from nowhere and everywhere at once. His parents ran desperately through the halls, chasing the sound, but each turn brought them closer to shadows and farther from their son. The laughter grew distorted, stretched until it became a scream. The ship was no longer a vessel of joy, but a coffin drifting on endless water. Emergency sirens wailed, drowned by the roar of crashing waves. Passengers shoved past one another in blind panic, clawing toward stairwells, crying out for lifeboats that could never survive the storm outside. But it wasn't the storm they should have feared. It was the sound of wet footsteps echoing just behind them, the shadows moving against the direction of the emergency lights. Lena stumbled into the ballroom, now half flooded, chandeliers swinging wildly above as water poured in through shattered windows. Dozens of passengers huddled there, their eyes wide, their breath sharp and shallow. Then silence fell. The air grew heavy, damp, unbreathable. From the far end of the ballroom, the woman in white appeared once more, her gown trailing through the rising water, leaving ripples that spread outward like veins across the floor. She did not walk. She glided, her bare feet never quite touching the ground, faces pressed against the glass from outside, dozens of waterlogged figures staring in, their hands sliding across the windows with squeals that pierced the passengers' ears. Evelyn raised her hand and every chandelier light above shattered in unison, glass raining down as the room plunged into near darkness. The only illumination came from the lightning outside, flashing on the drowned faces that peered hungrily inward. A man screamed as something cold wrapped around his ankle. He kicked and struggled, but when others shone flashlights, they saw pale, decayed fingers gripping his leg from beneath the water. He was pulled down with a violent splash, his cries muffled instantly. The surface stilled, no bubbles rising, no body floating back up, just silence and the lingering ripple. People rushed for the doors, but they slammed shut on their own, sealing tight as if the ship itself obeyed Evelyn's will. Lena clutched the nearest table, shaking, her eyes never leaving the woman. Evelyn's hollow gaze shifted toward her, and though no words left her mouth, Lena heard them, inside her head, inside her bones. You saw me. You carry my reflection now. The sea remembers you too. Lena collapsed to her knees, choking on salt water, though her lips had never touched the waves. She coughed violently, seawater spilling from her lungs onto the ballroom floor. The passengers shrieked, some trying to lift her, others backing away in terror. Evelyn only watched, her expression unreadable, her presence growing stronger as more lights failed across the ship. Below deck, crew members fought to seal the flooding corridors. Their radios hissed with static until voices emerged, children's voices singing softly, a melody that shifted into screams. One engineer swore he heard his dead sister calling his name, though she had drowned years earlier. He abandoned his post, running blindly into the dark hallway. His flashlight beam caught the outline of a soaked dress just before it cut out, and his scream was the last sound the others heard. The engines failed. The Seraphine drifted aimlessly, pulled by unseen currents. Passengers clung to each other, whispering prayers, but prayers meant nothing here. Evelyn had claimed her place, and with her came the army of the drowned. Hours bled together. No sunrise came. The ship was locked in an endless midnight, thunder rolling without end. Some passengers swore they had seen land just over the horizon, but when they pointed, others saw nothing. Only black waves stretching forever. Reality itself seemed to bend. In the captain's quarters, Ramirez pored over the cursed logs, sweat dripping down his face. His hands shook as he read the words written by the ship's first captain all those years ago. "We covered it up. We said she fell. But the truth is she never sank. The sea took her, but she did not drown. She became its voice." He dropped the logbook when the walls began to drip water, salt crystals forming across his maps. The compass spun violently, then shattered, shards embedding into the wooden desk. Ramirez whispered a prayer, but his voice cracked. He knew the truth. There was no outrunning her. Back in the ballroom, Evelyn's figure flickered between solid and translucent, like a candle flame struggling against the wind. Passengers cowered, some weeping, others frozen in silent terror. Suddenly, the missing child's laughter rang through the room. Aaron stood in the corner, his pajamas soaked, his small hand clutching Evelyn's gown. He smiled at his parents across the crowd, but his eyes were empty, black pools reflecting the storm outside. His mother screamed his name, wading through the water to reach him. But Evelyn lowered her head and the boy stepped backward, vanishing into the dark waves that seeped through the walls. His mother lunged after him, disappearing into the same water, her scream cut off abruptly. The father followed in blind desperation, and then silence returned. 3 lives erased in seconds, leaving only ripples across the flooded ballroom floor. The survivors knew then, this was not a haunting. It was a harvest. The ship moaned, metal straining, decks groaning as though alive. Lena, barely conscious, felt the pull inside her chest. The same pull that had claimed Evelyn decades ago. She staggered to her feet, her reflection still whispering in every window, every pool of water, every set of drowning eyes. She realized with bone-deep horror that Evelyn was not simply haunting the ship, she was remaking it. The Seraphine itself was becoming her. And in that moment, as passengers sobbed and waves struck harder than ever, Lena understood the truth. No one would ever disembark this voyage. The sea had chosen its new city, a floating graveyard, forever sailing without destination, filled with echoes of those who once dared to believe the ocean could be tamed. The Seraphine drifted deeper into the endless black, its once bright decks now drowned in shadow. The passengers who remained alive huddled together, their eyes wild, their whispers breaking into sobs. Each corner of the ship echoed with sounds that didn't belong, chairs dragging by unseen hands, wet footprints crossing empty corridors, distant voices crying for help though no one was there. Lena stumbled along the flooded hallways, her breath ragged, her chest aching as if seawater had already filled her lungs. Every reflective surface showed Evelyn's hollow eyes staring back at her, sometimes whispering, sometimes screaming. She tried to close her eyes, but even in darkness the visions remained. Evelyn wasn't behind her anymore, she was inside her. On the outer decks, passengers attempted to launch lifeboats. They cut the ropes, but the boat splashed down into a sea that looked solid, not liquid, black as tar. The first group who climbed inside screamed as the water beneath them writhed. Dozens of pale hands erupted from the surface, grabbing, clawing, pulling the entire boat under without a trace. Only the bubbling foam remained, glowing faintly green in the lightning flashes. Panic turned to madness. Some passengers leapt overboard, convinced they saw land shimmering in the distance. They vanished before hitting the surface, swallowed by the storm's mouth. Others locked themselves in their cabins, only to hear knocking from beneath their beds, salt water rising steadily around their ankles as drowned voices whispered lullabies until their screams drowned too. The crew tried one last effort, restart the engines, but when the chief mechanic descended into the engine room, he froze. Every machine was dripping with seawater, though no pipe had burst. Chains rattled, gears groaned, and standing in the middle of the room was Evelyn, her dress soaking the steel floor, her eyes fixed on him. He dropped his wrench and ran, but the doors slammed shut, and moments later his scream echoed through the vents. The engines never roared again. The ballroom, now the last refuge, shook violently as the storm howled. The drowned pressed against the windows, their eyeless sockets leaking streams of black water. Then, with a deafening crack, the glass shattered inward and the flood poured through. Passengers were swept from their feet, tumbling, gasping, dragged into the torrent. Some clung to furniture, others to each other, but one by one the waves pried them loose. Lena fought to stay above the rushing water, her hands grasping for anything solid. Through the chaos, she saw Evelyn standing untouched at the center, Aaron clutching her gown. Dozens of other drowned children forming around her like a family reclaimed. Evelyn raised her arms and the water obeyed, rising higher, swallowing screams, crushing walls. Lena felt her body lifted, suspended in the torrent. In her last fading moments of breath, she locked eyes with Evelyn. For the first time, Evelyn's lips curved into something almost human, a smile. And then Lena understood. The ship was no longer cursed by Evelyn. It was Evelyn. The Seraphine had become her body, her voice, her eternal vengeance, carrying the drowned as passengers forever. The ocean silenced its fury. The waves stilled. The storm passed. When the horizon brightened hours later, the Seraphine was gone. Not a single trace remained. No debris, no lifeboats, no signal. The sea was smooth, calm, endless. And somewhere beneath those perfect waves, the ballroom lights flickered back on. Music played faintly, distorted by the water. The drowned danced eternally in silence while the Seraphine sailed deeper into the abyss, searching for its next unsuspecting passengers. The phantom passenger had claimed her ship forever. Days later, the Coast Guard received fragments of distress signals, broken words carried through static. Most of it was garbled, but one repeated phrase bled through again and again. "She's here. She's still here." Then silence. When search ships combed the last known coordinates of the Seraphine, they found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no floating luggage. Just the endless horizon, waves gentle as if nothing had ever disturbed them. Official reports claimed the liner sank suddenly in an uncharted storm. Families mourned without bodies, and the company issued statements promising safety upgrades. But the whispers never stopped. Fishermen told of nights when their nets caught scraps of velvet tablecloth, waterlogged jewelry, or shoes that looked freshly worn. Some swore they saw a floating palace on the horizon, lit with chandeliers, music drifting faintly across the water. But when they sailed closer, the lights faded and only empty sea remained. One diver who ventured too deep in the region claimed he saw the ship intact, resting on the ocean floor. Yet when he reached out, its hull throbbed like living flesh and windows opened like blinking eyes. He surfaced screaming, never to dive again. Lena's story did not end with her drowning. In coastal towns, survivors of other wrecks spoke of a stewardess who appeared on shorelines, soaked and trembling, asking for towels she could never deliver. Witnesses described her coughing seawater, her eyes wide with terror before vanishing into mist. Was she trapped between the living and the drowned, cursed to wander endlessly as Evelyn's reflection? The Seraphine itself became a legend whispered among sailors. Some called it the floating graveyard, others called it the Phantom City, but those who had lost family aboard gave it a darker name, the ship that eats. And still at midnight, when storms brew without warning, lights are seen far out at sea. Music carries across the waves, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Anyone foolish enough to follow that glow never returns. For Evelyn Moreau, the phantom passenger, still welcomes guests aboard. Her ship sails forever, feeding on fear, memory, and lives, each voyage longer than the last. The ocean forgets nothing. It only waits. Months passed after the Seraphine's disappearance, but the sea did not rest. Fishermen along the Atlantic routes began whispering about strange lights far out at night. Some claimed they saw a chandelier glow shimmering above the horizon, swinging gently as if caught in a storm that didn't exist. When they drew closer, the glow vanished, replaced by silent waves. One trawler crew reported something worse. Their nets snagged on a massive object. They hauled for hours, expecting wreckage or driftwood. Instead, they pulled up a velvet chair, soaked yet impossibly intact, barnacles clinging to its legs. When they dragged it aboard, salt water poured out, and for a moment they swore they heard muffled music, violins, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Within minutes, the chair began to rot in their hands, wood collapsing into black mush. That night, every man on that boat dreamed of the same thing. A woman in a white gown brushing her hair, whispering, "You're next." Sailors told of fog banks rolling across clear seas, swallowing vessels whole. One cargo ship passed through such a fog and reported seeing an enormous cruise liner drifting silently. Its decks were filled with people in elegant attire, standing motionless, their eyes black hollows. The cargo crew sounded their horn, but the liner made no sound, no movement. Then in a blink it dissolved into mist. The men swore they saw one figure remain after the ship vanished, a barefoot woman standing on the waves, staring at them until the fog consumed her too. Divers chasing wrecks in that region spoke of impossible discoveries. One swore he found the Seraphine on the ocean floor, pristine, its windows glowing as though alive. When he swam closer, he realized faces were staring at him from inside, hundreds of drowned eyes following his every move. His oxygen began to taste of salt water. He tore off his mask, clawing toward the surface, and when his team pulled him into the boat, he was gasping words they couldn't understand, syllables that sounded like a drowning lullaby. He never spoke again, only hummed at night, rocking back and forth as if still on the ship. Coastal villages whispered of a young stewardess who sometimes appeared on the shoreline. She staggered barefoot across the sand, her uniform torn, her skin pale, coughing seawater with every breath. Locals tried to help her, wrapping her in blankets, offering warmth, but she would always ask for the same thing. "Have you seen cabin 616? I left my towels there." Moments later, she dissolved into mist, leaving nothing but damp footprints trailing into the waves. Rescue patrols recorded strange signals in the dead of night. Distress calls came through the static, broken voices screaming about flooding halls, broken glass, children crying. One recording, never released to the public, captured a woman's calm voice beneath the panic. "Welcome aboard the Seraphine. Your voyage begins now." The signal ended in a shriek of rushing water, and still ships vanish, always at night, always in calm waters, always with no warning. The few survivors found adrift in lifeboats speak the same story, their eyes vacant, their voices trembling. They describe grand hallways filled with dripping water, chandeliers swinging over silent crowds, and a woman in white who glides without walking. They say she offers them a choice: join us, or feed us. Every one of those survivors died within weeks of rescue. Some drowned in their bathtubs, others collapsed at seaports, water gushing from their lungs as though they were still beneath the waves. And so, sailors learned to change their routes. They avoid the coordinates where the Seraphine vanished. They avoid the glowing lights in the distance, no matter how tempting. But still, some nights laughter drifts across the sea, and those who hear it cannot unhear it. For Evelyn Moreau sails forever, her ballroom filled with the drowned, her reflection waiting in every wave. The phantom passenger never needed tickets. She only needed time. The whispers of the Seraphine didn't stop at sea. They seeped into coastal towns, haunting the lives of those who never set foot on the vessel. Families of the missing passengers began receiving phone calls from numbers traced back to the cruise line, even though the ship's logs had been erased from all systems. One mother swore she picked up the phone late at night and heard her son's voice. He had boarded the Seraphine months earlier. His words were broken, muffled by static and rushing water. "Mom, I can't find the exit. They won't let us leave." Before she could respond, the line went dead. When authorities traced the call, they discovered it had originated from the middle of the Atlantic where no towers existed. Another family received postcards. Old-fashioned, yellowing cards with images of grand ballrooms and sparkling chandeliers. The handwriting belonged to their missing daughter. She wrote about the wonderful nights on board, about how the music never stopped, about how everyone was dressed so beautifully. At the bottom of the card was a date. 3 weeks after the Seraphine had already been declared lost, fishermen began reporting strange survivors floating in lifeboats. They weren't recorded in any passenger lists, but they all wore the same soaked uniforms: waiters, maids, entertainers. One such survivor was pulled ashore, trembling, muttering about the midnight feast. He said the passengers had been seated at long tables stretching across the ballroom. Plates piled high with food that never spoiled. But when he took a bite, he realized it wasn't meat or bread. It was rotten seaweed crawling with maggots, dripping with salt water. He vomited as the others cheered and clapped. The hostess stood at the head of the table, raising her glass, smiling as her skin peeled in strips. Rescue logs also revealed another horrifying pattern. Lifeboats found adrift in the fog sometimes held no people, only belongings. Shoes neatly arranged, watches ticking, glasses folded as if their owners had simply vanished mid-breath. But divers who later searched those same areas swore they saw people suspended beneath the waves, hundreds of them, their eyes open, arms reaching toward the surface. Yet when the divers swam down, there was nothing. Even the Navy intervened. A patrol ship shadowed a massive silhouette on radar one night, Believing it to be an unregistered cruise liner, they broadcast warnings. No response. The silhouette glided silently across the water, closer and closer. When the crew finally spotted it through binoculars, their captain froze. The decks were packed with pale, dripping figures, all facing the same direction. None moved, none blinked. Then, as the patrol ship drew near, the entire vessel vanished, leaving behind only waves. By now, the Seraphine had become more than a lost ship. It was an invitation. Stories spread that those who heard the distant ballroom music could not resist it. Merchant crews, Navy sailors, even tourists claimed they woke in the night to faint melodies, pulling them toward the sea. Some resisted. Others followed the sound and were never seen again. One of the most terrifying accounts came from a lighthouse keeper off the coast of Ireland. He reported seeing a cruise liner drifting just beyond the rocks. He said the lights were dazzling, the decks alive with shadows dancing. Then he noticed something that broke his sanity, his own reflection on the deck dancing among the dead. For weeks afterward, the keeper locked himself inside the tower, refusing to look out the windows. He was found months later, drowned in a barrel of rainwater, his lips blue, his face frozen in a smile. Travelers today still claim that in certain parts of the Atlantic, on quiet nights they hear the echo of crystal glasses clinking. Sometimes a white-gloved waiter appears at the railings of other ships, bowing politely before vanishing. Sometimes a woman's voice drifts across the waves. Your cabin is ready. And sometimes an entire cruise liner appears in the fog, grand and glittering, passengers waving from the deck. If you wave back, sailors say, you'll never return to shore. The ocean finally calmed, but the legend of the Seraphine never sank. Every sailor knew the warnings. Every family who lost someone prayed their loved ones had found peace. But the sea doesn't give back what it takes. It only borrows until it's ready to collect more. On one moonless night, a cargo vessel passed through the region where the Seraphine had vanished. The crew kept their eyes low, refusing to glance at the horizon. But one young deckhand couldn't resist. He looked out over the waves and froze. The water was glowing faintly as if lit from below. Slowly, impossibly, a shape began to rise. A grand cruise liner, elegant and terrible, dripping with seawater, barnacles clinging to its sides. Music drifted across the air, faint violins weaving a melody of sorrow and invitation. The deck was alive with figures, drenched, pale, their clothes torn, their smiles too wide. At the center, a woman in a soaked white gown raised her hand in greeting. Her eyes were endless black pools swallowing all light. The deckhand tried to scream, but no sound left his throat. When the cargo captain pulled him back, the young man's eyes had already glazed over. He whispered one final phrase before collapsing onto the deck, seawater spilling from his lips. She says there's always room for more. By dawn, the apparition was gone, but the boy's body was never found. Only his boots remained, placed neatly at the ship's railing, pointing out toward the endless, hungry sea. And so the Seraphine sails on, an eternal cruise with no destination, no salvation, only the endless promise of another guest. Those who hear the music will follow. Those who see the lights will never return, and those who whisper her name, even on land, will feel the sea calling. The phantom passenger always finds her way. The ocean had finally stilled, but silence did not mean safety. Sailors crossing that stretch of water reported that the air felt heavy, as though the sea itself was holding its breath. Even the gulls avoided the region, their cries vanishing before reaching human ears. For weeks nothing happened, and then the sea remembered. One mist-laden night, a cargo freighter drifted through those waters. Its engines hummed, the crew restless, their eyes fixed on the endless horizon. No one spoke. Everyone had heard the legends of the Seraphine. The captain ordered lanterns dimmed, radios silent as though quiet might keep them hidden. But silence does not keep ghosts away. It began with a vibration faint, almost musical. The deckhand assigned to night watch tilted his head, frowning. The sound grew, a distant violin carried on the breeze. It wasn't harsh or jarring. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. Notes spiraled like threads of silver, weaving into the night air, wrapping around his mind until he swayed unconsciously to the rhythm. Then the fog rolled in, thick, wet, swallowing the freighter whole. Lights from the ship's bridge cut through only a few feet before vanishing. Crew members clutched the rails, praying. And then it appeared. From the fog rose a massive shadow, grand and elegant, larger than life. Slowly, with a groan of timbers and the crash of waves, a cruise liner emerged, every deck alight, every window glowing as though the sea itself had been hollowed to create this floating palace. It was the Seraphine. The freighter crew froze. Their captain whispered a single word, trembling. Impossible. But the impossible sailed right past them. Chandeliers gleamed through dripping glass. Velvet curtains fluttered in impossible winds. And the decks were alive. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns stood shoulder to shoulder, unmoving, their faces pale and waterlogged. Their hair floated around their heads as though still submerged, their mouths stretched into permanent smiles. Some waved, some beckoned with trembling fingers, others simply stared, eyes black as the void. At the center of the grand deck stood a figure in white. Her gown clung to her like seaweed, soaked and torn, but she carried herself with regal poise. Her hair, long and dark, dripped seawater onto the polished floor that should not have been dry. Slowly, she raised her hand in greeting. The music swelled, violins and piano mingling with the sound of rushing waves. The young deckhand could not resist. He gripped the railing, leaning forward, eyes wide with awe. His lips parted in a smile not his own. The crew screamed his name, pulling at his arms, but he shook them off as if they weighed nothing. His eyes had glazed over, reflecting only the glowing ship. Then he whispered, voice calm, almost joyful. She says there's always room for more. Before anyone could stop him, he climbed the railing. The fog parted, and for one impossible heartbeat the crew swore they saw the deckhand no longer on their ship, but standing among the passengers of the Seraphine, dressed in a tuxedo, smiling with lifeless eyes. The woman in white rested her hand on his shoulder like a mother welcoming a child home. The next blink, he was gone. Only his boots remained, neatly placed side by side at the freighter's rail, pointing toward the endless ocean. By dawn, the apparition had vanished, swallowed back into the fog. The sea was calm again, as if nothing had happened, but the crew never spoke of it openly. They avoided mirrors, avoided music, avoided sleep. Still, whispers escaped. Some said they heard the deckhand's voice late at night humming that same violin tune. Some said they saw his reflection in the water whenever they looked overboard. The Seraphine had claimed another passenger. And it would not be the last, for she sails eternally, her ballroom waiting, her host watching, her drowned guests whispering to the living, "Welcome aboard. Your cabin is ready." And so the legend grows, not a story of one ship lost, but of a curse that will never rest. Anyone who dares to look too long into the mist risks becoming part of the passenger list. The phantom passenger always finds her way. The ocean crest was a floating city, 12 decks high, painted snow white, lights glittering across the horizon like a drifting constellation. When it pulled away from Miami's port, thousands of passengers lined the rails, waving, laughing, throwing streamers into the water below. Music thundered from the pool deck. Children ran between their parents' legs, their laughter mixing with the blast of the ship's horn. Daniel Harper stood apart from the chaos, clutching the strap of his worn leather bag. He was a schoolteacher, quiet, reserved, the kind of man who read books in empty cafeterias. This was his first vacation in years, a solo cruise, 7 nights at sea. He told himself it would be an adventure, a chance to breathe, to forget the suffocating gray of Chicago winters. And yet as the ocean crest drifted further from shore, Daniel couldn't shake the unease curling in his stomach. Cabin 329 was small, but clean. A single bed pressed against the wall, a desk with a mirror above it, a narrow closet, and a round porthole window sealed shut with polished steel. At first glance, ordinary, but the moment Daniel stepped inside, he noticed the air. Heavy, damp, the kind of air that clung to the back of your throat like wet cloth. He ran his hand along the desk. It came away moist, though there was no sign of a leak. He brushed it off, his nerves unpacked, and lay on the bed, letting the hum of the ship lull him. The mattress dipped more than expected. Like someone else had been lying there just moments before, he shifted uneasily, eyes wandering to the mirror. The mirror reflected his cabin, but something felt wrong. Corners stretched just slightly too far, angles warped as though the room were wider in the reflection than reality. Daniel frowned, leaning closer. For a split second, he swore he saw movement, like a figure brushing past behind him. He spun around, nothing. Only the closed door, the silent room, the faint vibration of engines deep below. That night, Daniel struggled to sleep. The ship rocked gently, steady as a cradle. But around midnight, a sound woke him, at first faint like distant footsteps. He assumed it was passengers heading back from the lounge. But then he realized. The sound was directly above him, pacing, slow, deliberate, heel to toe, back and forth. Daniel's brow furrowed. According to the deck map, there were no cabins above his, only the open-air promenade. Curious and unsettled, he pressed his ear to the ceiling. The footsteps stopped instantly, as if whoever was walking knew he was listening. He lay awake until dawn. The next day, he asked a crew member casually, "Is there staff lodging above Deck 3? The crewman shook his head firmly. "Above you, sir, no cabins. Just steel and sky." Daniel laughed awkwardly, pretending not to care, but the unease gnawed at him. That night the sound returned, louder, pacing again. Only this time there was a second sound. 3 soft knocks, steady from inside the wall near his bed. He sat up, heart hammering. The knocks repeated, this time faster, urgent. 3 slow. 2 quick. 3 slow. It was a rhythm, a pattern. He grabbed the desk lamp, shining it at the wall. Wallpaper, perfectly smooth. No signs of a gap. But the knocking came again, closer now, as though the wall were thinner than paper. Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in the desk chair staring at the mirror. His reflection stared back, pale and tired. And then, as his eyes blurred with exhaustion, the reflection's lips moved, just slightly, forming words he didn't speak. He stumbled back, knocking the chair over, clutching his chest. When he looked again, the mirror showed only his terrified face. The third night was worse. Much worse. It began with the door rattling. The handle turned, shook violently as though someone on the other side was desperate to come in. Daniel leapt from bed, heart pounding, and yanked it open, ready to confront whoever was playing games. The hallway was empty, silent. But when he turned back into the cabin, his suitcase had moved. It now sat inches closer to the bed, its zipper half open. Clothing spilled out as though someone had been rifling through it. His throat tightened. His fingers trembled as he zipped it shut. Exhausted, broken, Daniel collapsed onto the mattress. He closed his eyes, muttering to himself, "I'm imagining this. Just nerves. Just the sea." But when he awoke at dawn, the mirror above the desk was fogged over, though the room was freezing cold. And written across the glass in dripping streaks were 3 words, "Don't leave me." The words on the mirror would not fade. Daniel wiped at them with a towel until the glass squeaked, but no matter how hard he scrubbed, the message remained faintly visible, etched into the fog like scars that refused to heal. "Don't leave me," his chest tightened. Who could have written it? The door had been locked. The window was sealed. No one could have entered his cabin without a key, and even if they had, who would leave a message like that? By noon, Daniel tried to convince himself it was a prank, maybe a cruel joke from housekeeping. He avoided the cabin as much as possible, wandering the ship instead. He sat in the buffet for hours, staring at strangers, watching their smiles, their laughter, their easy conversations. They seemed so normal, so alive. But when his eyes flicked toward the reflective glass doors of the dining hall, he caught something that turned his stomach cold. His own reflection was sitting at a table across the room, not moving, not eating, just staring directly at him. Daniel blinked, heart lurching. When he looked again, the table was empty. His fork clattered to the floor. That night, back in cabin 329, the air grew heavier than ever. It felt swampy, oppressive, pressing down on his chest. He opened the closet just to prove to himself it was empty. Inside, his clothes hung stiffly, dripping wet, though he hadn't worn them. The carpet beneath was damp, squishing under his shoes. He stumbled back, whispering, "No, this isn't real." The knocking returned, louder now. Not in patterns this time, but frantic, violent pounding that shook the walls. The mirror trembled on its hook, the desk rattled. Daniel covered his ears, shouting for it to stop. And then, silence. A softer sound followed. Breathing. Right behind him. He turned slowly, terror gripping his spine. The room looked empty, but the temperature had dropped sharply, his breath puffing white in the air. The mirror was fogged again, the same words carved deeper this time. "Don't leave me." But beneath them, something new appeared, written by an invisible hand as he watched, letter by letter, "Stay forever." Daniel stumbled backward, hitting the door. His hands fumbled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. He hadn't locked it. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. And in that darkness, he heard the mattress dip, the sound of weight pressing into the bed, the sheets shifting slowly. A whisper, wet and broken, slid through the air. "You promised. You wouldn't leave me alone again." The darkness inside cabin 329 was not natural. It was thick, suffocating, almost liquid. Daniel's chest rose and fell in shallow gasps as his trembling fingers clawed at the door handle. Metal cut into his palms, but it would not turn. Locked from the inside. He knew he hadn't locked it. Behind him, the mattress dipped again. Springs groaned, slow, deliberate, as though someone or something was shifting its weight, settling in. The whisper returned, closer now, right against his ear. "You left me once. You won't leave again." Daniel spun, pressing his back to the door. His eyes strained in the dark. For a heartbeat, lightning flashed outside the porthole, illuminating the cabin. The bed was no longer empty. Something lay beneath the sheets. A body-shaped outline, long hair spilling across the pillow, shoulders rising as though breathing. The sheets clung wetly, dripping onto the carpet in dark streams. The smell hit him then, salt water, mold, and something older, like flesh long drowned. Daniel's throat locked. His voice emerged in a broken whisper. "Who are you?" The figure stirred. The sheets slid slowly, agonizingly, revealing pale skin, swollen and waterlogged, lips purple, eyes clouded like milk. She smiled, an awful, jagged smile. "Don't you remember me?" Daniel screamed, hurling himself against the door. It flew open this time, as though the lock had never existed. He stumbled into the hallway, crashing into the wall. The corridor lights buzzed overhead, flickering, shadows stretching too long across the carpet. Passengers were gone, silent. Not a sound but his ragged breathing. He ran, past doors identical to his own, past stairwells, his shoes slapping the floor. No matter how far he went, the hallway never seemed to end. Door after door, numbers repeating, 321, 322, 323, then again 321, 322, 323. He slowed, realization crawling cold over his skin. He was trapped in a loop. Behind him, footsteps echoed, bare feet wet, slapping against the carpet. He didn't dare turn, but he could hear her humming, a soft lullaby broken by gurgling water in her throat. He sprinted again. His legs burned. Finally, a staircase appeared. He bolted upward, shoving the door open onto the promenade deck. Cold night air slammed against him. The ocean stretched endless and black under the moonlight. Relief flooded him until he noticed the deck was empty. No laughing passengers, no music, no crew, just rows of empty chairs damp with seawater. Dozens of towels hung from railings, dripping steadily as though freshly wrung out. Daniel staggered forward, clutching the rail, eyes darting everywhere. "Help, somebody help me!" His voice cracked, lost in the vastness. And then he saw them. Figures stood at the far end of the deck, silhouettes in the moonlight. One by one, their heads turned toward him in unison. Their faces caught the pale glow, pale, bloated, their eyes blank white. Every passenger he could see was dead, soaked through, hair plastered to their faces, lips twitching into silent smiles. At their center stood the woman from his cabin, her soaked gown trailing across the boards, leaving puddles in her wake. She raised a hand, elegant, commanding. The dead passengers began to walk, not run. Not stagger, walk. In perfect unison toward Daniel. He backed away, hitting the rail. Waves crashed below, black and endless. His hands gripped the cold steel, fingers trembling. He glanced down, heart hammering. Jump into the sea or face the impossible tide of the drowned? The whisper reached him again, but this time it came from inside his head. "You can't leave me. Not again. Stay. Forever." Daniel's scream tore into the night, carried away by the waves. When morning came, cabin 329 was empty. The bed made, the mirror polished. Daniel Harper's belongings sat neatly in the closet, dry and untouched. Only the porthole was different. From the outside, crew members swore they saw a pale face pressed against the glass, staring out at the ocean, watching, waiting. And on the mirror, faint but undeniable, 5 words shimmered in the morning light. "Welcome to your new home." Morning sunlight cut across the endless waves, painting the cruise ship's decks in golden warmth. But inside, the crew was restless. Daniel Harper had not reported for breakfast, nor for his scheduled excursion. At first, it was shrugged off. Passengers often overslept after late nights of drinking. Yet when housekeeping knocked on cabin 329, no answer came. The door unlocked easily. The room was spotless. Bed tucked with military precision, towels folded, no signs of disturbance. His suitcase remained in the closet, clothes neatly hung. But something unsettled the steward who entered first. A dampness lingered in the air, clinging to the wallpaper, to the carpet underfoot. The mirror above the desk seemed to glisten unnaturally, as if polished only moments before. The steward stepped closer, frowning. A faint outline on the glass caught the light. 5 words traced by a finger, almost erased but not completely. "Welcome to your new home." By noon, rumors began to spread. A passenger missing. A man last seen the night before running panicked down the corridor. The story grew with each retelling. Some said they heard him scream on the upper deck. Others swore they saw him leap into the sea. One woman claimed she awoke at dawn and glimpsed him standing motionless by the rail, drenched, staring blankly at the horizon. Security combed the ship. CCTV was checked. Oddly, the cameras in Daniel's corridor had gone dark between 2:13 a.m. and 3 a.m. A blackout no technician could explain. Footage before that showed him pacing outside his cabin, glancing over his shoulder, muttering to himself. His lips moved as if in conversation, though no one else appeared on screen. The captain ordered silence. The official statement declared Daniel had likely gone overboard during the night, a tragedy but not unheard of on cruises. A prayer service was scheduled at dusk. Passengers were urged not to gossip, not to frighten the others. But whispers cannot be contained. By evening, clusters of guests huddled in lounges, trading versions of the story. "Cabin 329, they whispered, eyes darting. That's where he stayed. Some claimed they'd always avoided that side of the ship, that it carried an old reputation. One elderly man insisted he had sailed on the same vessel years ago, back when it bore a different name. He remembered another disappearance. A young bride vanished without a trace. Her husband found in the corridor, babbling about a woman in white, drenched, whispering in his ear. Housekeeping staff grew reluctant. None wanted to service 329. When one maid finally gathered courage to enter, she emerged pale and trembling, refusing to return. She claimed she had heard water dripping in the closet, though everything inside was bone dry. Another swore she heard someone humming softly, a lullaby, when the cabin was empty. Passengers began avoiding the hallway entirely, detouring around the deck rather than past the cursed door. Some children dared each other to knock. At night, a few claimed to hear faint scratching from inside, as though nails dragged slowly across the walls. The captain dismissed it all as hysteria. "Ships breed stories," he told his officers. "The sea makes liars of us all." But even he avoided the mirror in 329 when he inspected it himself. For in its surface, just for an instant, he thought he saw a woman's face behind his own, eyes pale and endless, smiling as though she already knew his fate. By the next night, another passenger was gone. The second disappearance happened quietly, without alarm. Her name was Claire Watkins, a schoolteacher from Maine traveling alone to find herself after a divorce. She was well-liked, chatty at dinners, always carrying a small leather journal where she scribbled daily reflections. On the 3rd morning after Daniel vanished, her table at breakfast remained empty. At first, no one thought much of it. Some assumed she had overslept. Others believed she was attending an excursion. But by midday, her absence grew harder to ignore. Her friends asked crew members to knock at her door. They did, no answer. Eventually, security opened her cabin. Inside, the room was pristine. The bed made, her suitcase neatly packed. The only thing out of place was her journal, resting open on the desk. Its final entry was scrawled in frantic handwriting as though written in the dark, the ink blotched and uneven. "She is here." She knocked 3 times. I thought it was a dream, but the door opened on its own. She asked me to follow, said the sea was calling. I tried to scream, but the sound drowned before it left my mouth. If anyone reads this, don't look at the mirror. The page ended there. The mirror above the desk bore a handprint, small, wet. When word of Claire's disappearance spread, the ship's atmosphere shifted from uneasy tension to suffocating dread. Passengers no longer whispered casually. Now they glanced over their shoulders as they spoke, lowering their voices to hushed tones. Some demanded to be relocated away from Deck 3 where both missing guests had stayed. Others begged the captain to turn back to dock at the nearest port. But the captain held firm. "We are still safe," he insisted during a forced gathering in the main lounge. His face was pale, sweat beading his brow, but his voice carried authority. "The ocean has its dangers, yes, but we will not surrender to rumor and superstition. We will complete our voyage." No one applauded. That night, storm clouds gathered. Rain lashed the decks, waves hammered the hull, and the ship groaned with each strike of thunder. Power flickered across several decks, plunging hallways into stuttering light and shadow. In those moments of blackout, passengers swore they saw figures moving, dripping figures, standing too still, faces blank. Children cried in their bunks, parents clutching them tightly. Elderly passengers prayed aloud in their cabins. Housekeeping refused to enter Deck 3 entirely. Crew members muttered of transfer requests if the voyage continued. Yet no one dared speak of it openly, for fear the ship itself was listening. And then came the knocking. Cabin after cabin reported it. Always at night, always 3 sharp knocks against the door. When opened, no one was there. Just wet footprints trailing away, disappearing before they reached the next corridor. One couple, desperate to prove it was a prank, left a camera recording their door overnight. The footage reviewed the next morning showed the door handle turning slowly, deliberately, though no one was visible in the hall. 3 knocks followed, deafening, shaking the camera, and then for one single frame a woman's face appeared in the lens, waterlogged, grinning, her eyes hollow voids. The feed cut to static. By dawn the couple had vanished, their bed sheets soaked as though dragged through the ocean. The legend of Cabin 329 was no longer confined to whispers. It had spread like a stain across the entire vessel. The drowned woman was not waiting for visitors to come to her anymore. She was moving, knocking, choosing, and with every disappearance the sea seemed to grow hungrier. Waves struck harder. The ship groaned louder. It was as if the ocean itself celebrated each offering. The captain refused to speak of it, but his hands shook on the wheel. In his private quarters, he stared at the mirror above his desk, where droplets of salt water slowly traced words he had not written. "You will be the last." The storm worsened until it felt less like weather and more like rage. Waves towered over the ship, slamming against its sides, windows rattling like brittle bones. Lightning split the sky in jagged veins, each flash illuminating the decks for a brief, terrible instant. In those flashes, figures were visible, soaked pale, lining the railings, unmoving, staring inward. Passengers huddled in the main lounge, clutching one another. The air reeked of dampness, though no windows were open. Every surface glistened as if coated in condensation. Crew members whispered among themselves, pale-faced, refusing to meet the captain's eyes. No one wanted to be the first to speak the truth aloud. The ship itself had become a mausoleum adrift at sea. At 2 a.m., the power died. The lights flickered once, then darkness swallowed everything. Screams rose in the lounge, children sobbing, adults fumbling for flashlights. But in the pitch black, the sound of footsteps echoed. Wet, deliberate. A lullaby floated through the air, low, gurgling, drowning halfway through each note. The sound came from everywhere at once. Flashlights. An officer barked. But when beams cut through the dark, they revealed horror. Passengers stood among them who hadn't been there before, water dripping from their hair, their skin bloated and gray. Their eyes rolled back to reveal only white, their mouths twitching into grotesque smiles. They did not attack. They simply stood, swaying gently as if to the rhythm of the unseen song. The captain forced his way to the bridge, a handful of loyal crew at his side. Lightning illuminated the portholes as he gripped the wheel, but the compass spun wildly, the radar blank as though the ship were no longer in earthly waters. "We'll steer into the storm," he shouted, desperation cracking his voice. "We'll break this curse." But the sea was not his to command. Behind him, one of the officers gasped, pointing. The reflection in the glass before them did not match the room. Instead of frightened men in soaked uniforms, the reflection showed them drowned already, their skin bloated, lips purple, eyes lifeless. And in the center, towering over them all, was her, the drowned woman. The phantom bride, the whisperer of Cabin 329. Her white gown floated as if underwater, hair billowing in invisible currents. She raised her hand slowly, pointing directly at the captain. The bridge door slammed shut. Salt water burst from the seams, flooding across the floor in seconds. The crew screamed, but no matter how they clawed at the door, it would not open. Their cries turned to choking gurgles. When the storm broke minutes later, the bridge was silent. In the lounge, passengers watched in horror as more among them began to change. A woman clutched her husband, but his skin grew clammy under her grip. His mouth split into a smile not his own. She backed away, sobbing, as his voice emerged in a hollow whisper. "She waits for you, too." One by one, they were claimed. Not all at once, but slowly, cruelly, as if the sea enjoyed prolonging the suffering. Some leapt overboard, only for their screams to cut off abruptly as pale hands rose from the waves to drag them under. Others collapsed where they stood, lungs filling with water though no ocean touched them. By dawn, silence blanketed the decks. The ship drifted, eerily still, its once bright paint peeling, its windows clouded. Not a single living passenger remained. And yet if one walked those decks, they would hear faint laughter echoing muffled conversations, glasses clinking, the sounds of a party long ended. Playing in eternal repetition, cabin 329's door hung slightly ajar. Inside, the mirror glistened with condensation. Words slowly formed on its surface, traced by an invisible hand. Next voyage boarding soon. The ship sailed on, crewed by shadows, carrying an endless passenger list that only grew with time. Its name would change, ownership would change, but the curse remained. Those who boarded never truly disembarked, and the drowned bride, the woman in white, still roamed the halls, whispering promises of eternity to anyone who dared listen. Days later, a cargo vessel spotted the cruise ship adrift, its gleaming lights dimmed, its decks eerily quiet. The vessel's captain reported it via radio. Passenger ship on horizon. No movement on deck. Requesting assistance. Rescue teams arrived by helicopter the following morning. From above, the Aurora Queen looked intact, elegant even, but strangely aged, as though she had been at sea for decades, not weeks. Rust streaked her hull. Barnacles clung high above the waterline. Curtains inside the cabins fluttered, though no figures moved within. When the rescue crew boarded, the silence was suffocating. No music, no laughter, no human sound. Only the groan of the ship's steel and the faint trickle of water dripping through unseen cracks. They found dining halls set for dinner, plates stacked, glasses filled with murky water instead of wine. Cabins were immaculately clean, beds made with care. But in every mirror they passed, they swore they saw movement, reflections that lagged behind, faces staring that weren't their own. The lounge was worst of all. Chairs arranged in perfect circles as if guests had only just stepped away, but the cushions were soaked, leaving wet stains behind. Salt water pooled on the floor, though no windows were broken, and faintly, unbearably faintly, they could hear it, music. A violin, scratchy and uneven, playing a tune that drifted like a funeral march. When one rescuer ventured into cabin 329, the others warned him not to. He insisted anyway. Minutes passed. When they finally forced the door open, the room was empty, except for his flashlight lying on the carpet still glowing. His boots sat neatly by the bed. The rescue team withdrew in panic. They radioed the vessel abandoned, a lost cause, a floating tomb. The Aurora Queen was left to drift, a ghost on the horizon. Weeks later, fishermen in another part of the ocean swore they saw her again, bright, beautiful, alive with music and laughter. From afar, she looked like any other cruise liner, full of life. But as the fishing vessel drew closer, the music warped, voices slurred, and the laughter turned into screams. The fishermen fled before they could see more. Since then, sightings have multiplied. The cursed ship reappears across the seas, always pristine from a distance, always welcoming to new passengers. But those who board never return. The sea swallows them, and the phantom bride of cabin 329 gains new company. Sailors whisper that her ship does not sail with the tides, but with hunger. That she charts no course but the souls of those who dare to listen. And if you're at sea on a moonless night and hear the faint sound of violins drifting across the waves, don't follow it. Don't look for the lights on the horizon, because she is waiting, and there is always room for more. The Aurora Queen was never seen docking again. No port ever logged her arrival, no passenger ever disembarked. And yet on certain nights, sailors swear they glimpse her silhouette against the horizon, a glittering city of light gliding silently across the waves. Music drifts from her decks, faint and haunting, the sound of violins echoing against the wind. But those who look too long, those who dare to raise binoculars or peer through scopes, see the truth. The decks are crowded with figures, yes, but not the living. They stand motionless, pale and dripping, eyes rolled white, smiling too wide. Their clothes are torn, their hair plastered to their skulls with salt water. And at the ship's bow in her eternal white gown, the drowned bride stands with her arms open, waiting for the next soul to welcome aboard. Sailors who witness this say they can feel the pull, as though the ocean itself tugs at their ship, urging them closer. Radios cut out, compasses spin, and faint whispers slither into their ears. Voices of loved ones long gone calling them by name. Some resist. Many do not. The Aurora Queen takes them silently. No splash, no struggle, just gone, leaving only their boots or belongings neatly placed on deck. As though they had chosen to stay behind and join the eternal voyage. And when the cursed ship fades back into the mist, the sea grows calm again, as if satisfied, until hunger rises once more. To this day, sailors warn young crew members of a simple rule. If you hear music on a dead calm night, don't search for its source. Don't follow the glow on the horizon. Don't whisper her name, because the ocean remembers, and the bride of cabin 329 never forgets. For weeks after the Aurora Queen was declared missing, Coast Guards searched the oceans tirelessly. Ships were diverted, satellites tracked suspicious signals, and families begged for answers. But every time the coordinates led search teams closer, the ship seemed to slip away into mist, like it had never been there. Until one night, a Norwegian tanker reported nearly colliding with a massive cruise liner that appeared out of nowhere in the fog. Its decks blazed with golden light, music spilling across the waves, laughter carrying on the wind. The tanker's crew cheered at first, thinking survivors had been found. But as their ship drew closer, the cheer died. Through binoculars, the faces of passengers came into focus. Their skin was pale, their hair slick and dripping, mouths open in silent screams that twisted into unnatural smiles. Every eye glowed faintly white in the mist. And then the music changed. The violin slowed, sour notes bending unnaturally, turning into something broken, discordant, like a celebration collapsing into a funeral dirge. The crew dropped their instruments one by one, but the sound continued, swelling louder, as if the ship itself played from within its hollow steel bones. The tanker captain ordered a retreat, engines roaring. But the Aurora Queen seemed to follow, gliding across the waves without disturbing them, her reflection not matching her movement. For hours she lingered in the fog, vanishing only when dawn burned across the horizon. The tanker crew was never the same. Half of them reported hearing music in their dreams, waking with salt water pooled on their pillows. One jumped overboard 2 weeks later during a calm voyage, claiming he saw her standing on the waves calling his name. Another refused to sail again, saying she saw wet handprints appear on her cabin mirror every night. Word spread fast. The Aurora Queen became a phantom on the seas, whispered about in every port. Sailors claimed she could appear anywhere, her hull spotless, her decks alive with eternal passengers who never tired, never aged, never left. And the drowned bride in her white gown always stood at the bow, veil whipping in the wind, her black eyes locked on the horizon. Some said she wasn't searching for random souls. She was hunting for someone specific, her groom, the one who left her to drown decades ago. Until she finds him, she would drag everyone else into her watery grave. Others said she was the ocean itself, given form, forever hungry, forever lonely, forever luring. The truth didn't matter, because if you were unlucky enough to glimpse her across the waves, you carried the curse with you. The music would haunt your nights. The knocking would follow in your home. The mirrors would show faces not your own. And sooner or later you'd wake to find salt water dripping from your ceiling, wet footprints across your floor, and a woman's whisper from the darkness. You should have stayed with me. No one escapes her voyage, not at sea, not on land, not even in death. The Starlight Mariner was one of the most luxurious liners ever built, a floating kingdom designed to drown its passengers in decadence. Casinos glimmered with chandeliers, pools sparkled under neon lights, and fine dining echoed with the clink of crystal glasses. Nearly 3,000 souls boarded that summer voyage, expecting paradise. But paradise shifted when the ship crossed the Sargasso Sea, an area sailors had whispered about for centuries. The waters grew unnaturally still. The wind died, and for days the vessel drifted like it was trapped on a glass sheet. The ocean smelled metallic heavy, suffocating as though it was alive and waiting. It started small. A stewardess vanished during her rounds below deck. Cameras showed her walking into the service corridor. Then nothing. She never emerged, her cart left behind with half-folded linens. The footage glitched the moment she disappeared. Static bursts, distorted colors, an echo of faint whispering voices. Then, more crew began to vanish. Always below deck. Always in the same stretch of corridor. No blood, no signs of struggle, just gone, as if the ship itself had swallowed them whole. At first, passengers weren't told. The captain insisted on discretion. But panic spread when guests began noticing strange changes. Room doors opening on their own in the middle of the night. Cold water dripping from ceilings despite no leaks found. Passengers reporting shadows sliding under their doors, as if someone was crawling in the hallway. And muffled screams echoing through ventilation shafts, traveling from nowhere to everywhere. Desperate, the crew sealed off the lower corridors. But the disappearances didn't stop. One night, a group of gamblers vanished right from the casino. Surveillance showed them sitting at the table laughing. And then, in the span of a single second, the chairs sat empty, chips scattered, drinks still vibrating from where they'd been placed. By the fifth night, hysteria had consumed the ship. Some passengers demanded lifeboats, but the sea was eerily calm. No wind, no waves, no horizon. Compasses spun uselessly, GPS failed, and radios screamed with static, the same phrase looping through the interference in a guttural voice no one recognized. Below deck. Below deck. Below deck. People locked themselves in their cabins, praying for dawn. But dawn never came. The sun refused to rise, and the ship drifted in endless twilight. Passengers would later say they remembered the exact moment the Starlight Mariner shifted from luxury to nightmare. It was when the stewardess, Eliza, vanished. She had been known for her cheerful smile, always humming old lullabies as she delivered towels and folded sheets. That night, she entered the service corridor on deck 7 with her cart rattling behind her. The lights above flickered once, then steadied. The CCTV showed her walking past 3 cabin doors. She paused at the 4th, humming faintly. Then, in the space of a blink, her body jolted as if someone had grabbed her wrist. Her head snapped to the side, eyes wide, mouth opening in silent shock. Then the feed warped. The picture smeared with static, the frame stretched unnaturally long like the hallway itself had bent. When the footage cleared, the cart remained. But Eliza was gone. Crew searched the corridor within minutes. They found only damp footprints leading away from the cart. But the prints weren't hers, they were bare, elongated, as though someone with impossibly long toes had walked dripping wet across the carpet, disappearing into the shadows where no door existed. That night, passengers in cabins nearby reported hearing knocking, not the casual rap of a neighbor, but slow, deliberate pounding from beneath the floorboards, traveling from one end of the corridor to the other. One guest swore she heard a woman crying beneath her bed, whispering words she didn't understand. And then, the dreams began. Dozens of passengers woke screaming, describing the same nightmare. Eliza standing in their cabin doorway, soaked to the bone, her skin pale and peeling, her lips moving but no sound escaping. Every time they tried to listen, they said the dream dissolved into the sound of rushing water and the sensation of being dragged down into the dark. The captain dismissed it as hysteria, but his voice shook when he gave the order to seal off deck 7. Yet sealing it off didn't help, because the next night a maintenance worker was sent to check the generators below deck. He never returned. His radio captured the last words he spoke. "It's dark down here. Too many doors. I think I hear breathing." And then the signal cut. The ship's engines groaned that night. Metal echoed like bones cracking. Lights dimmed across the ballroom, and every passenger swore they felt the ship sink slightly lower in the water. The whispers on the radios grew louder. Now they didn't just say below deck. They began calling passengers by name. By the 7th night, the Starlight Mariner no longer felt like a ship. It felt like a coffin adrift on an endless ocean. The ballroom that once glittered with laughter and music now stood silent, chandeliers swaying without wind, the carpet damp beneath the guests' shoes as if the ocean had already seeped in. The captain attempted to keep order, but panic was uncontrollable. Families clutched one another in the lounges, demanding answers. Others tried to force open lifeboats, their hands trembling as they lowered them into the unmoving black water. The sea stretched flat as glass, reflecting their pale faces back at them. One group of 12 managed to escape in a lifeboat. They rowed furiously, their arms aching, but the ship never grew smaller. No matter how long they rowed, the mariner remained beside them, floating silently, its windows glowing faintly with golden light. Then one of them screamed. They all turned. The lifeboat was no longer 12, it was 11. One seat was wet, dripping, empty. No splash had been heard. No ripple stirred the water, and then another vanished. This time the woman sitting beside him shrieked as he seemed to fold into himself, sucked downward through the seat as if the lifeboat itself had devoured him. In minutes 9 were gone. The last 3 begged for help, arms raised toward the ship they had tried so desperately to flee. The lifeboat returned by itself at dawn, drifting alongside the mariner. Only 2 objects remained inside, a child's shoe and a soaked, torn photograph of the captain in his youth. After that, no one tried to leave again. The crew, desperate for explanation, ventured into the restricted decks to investigate the strange noises. One officer reported an entire passageway lined with doors that shouldn't exist, hundreds of them stretching endlessly, each identical, each humming with faint vibrations. He opened one. Inside was not a cabin but a room filled with stagnant seawater and floating hair. He slammed it shut. The humming grew louder. Passengers began hearing names whispered from the walls. At first only crew, then families, then their own. A mother claimed she awoke to find her son standing at the end of her bed, dripping wet, whispering in perfect unison with 3 other voices that didn't belong to him. "It's warmer below deck. Come with us." By the 10th night, the ship's hallways had warped. People walked in circles, returning to the same spot no matter how far they went. Some claimed the staircases shifted direction, trapping them between floors. Others found themselves walking through corridors they didn't recognize at all, corridors that stretched too long, with ceilings too low, filled with the sound of rushing water behind the walls. And every night, more were taken, not violently, not with screams. Simply gone. Beds found soaked, clothes left folded, luggage still neatly packed, but no passenger. As though they had risen in the night, opened their doors and walked willingly below deck into the ship's heart. The captain himself changed. His once sharp eyes grew hollow, his voice thin. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. And then one evening during dinner, he stood at the head of the grand dining hall, raising a glass to the terrified passengers, and said in a flat, empty tone, "I've seen what waits below. You don't understand. It isn't a ship anymore. It's a mouth. And it will never let us go." The chandelier lights flickered. The floor beneath them vibrated like the deep groan of something alive. Plates rattled on tables. Passengers clutched each other as the captain dropped his glass, turned toward the sealed stairway to deck 7, and walked down without hesitation. He never came back. But that night, every cabin door clicked open by itself. One by one, all at once, and the voices whispered in unison from the vents, from the walls, from the water dripping through the ceilings. Below deck, below deck, below deck. Passengers soon stopped keeping track of time. The clocks on board froze at different hours, none of them moving forward, while the ship's PA system occasionally flickered alive with announcements in voices no one recognized. "Dinner will be served below deck. Passengers are kindly requested to check in. Below deck. The water is waiting." By now, nearly half the guests were missing. Some cabins were discovered empty with water stains spread across the bedsheets as though the sea itself had risen from within the mattress. Others were locked from the inside and, when forced open, revealed nothing but rooms filled ankle-deep with black, unmoving water that smelled of rotting seaweed. A small group of survivors banded together in the theater room. They barricaded the doors with furniture and spoke in whispers, terrified of attracting attention. Among them was a young couple, an elderly sailor traveling as a guest, and 3 crew members who had abandoned their posts. The sailor insisted the mariner had drifted into a dead ocean, a place sailors avoided for centuries, where the sea itself fed. At first, the others mocked him. But when the stage curtains began moving on their own, though no wind existed, and faint handprints pressed outward against the velvet from the other side, no one laughed again. That night, screams erupted from the upper deck. By the time the group pried open the theater doors to investigate, they found wet footprints leading down the grand staircase. Not one person screamed anymore. The ballroom was deserted, though tables were set for a feast that no one had prepared. Steam rose from untouched dishes, candles flickered in perfect unison, and in every wineglass was not wine but brackish salt water, flecked with strands of hair. They realized with horror that the ship wasn't merely killing them, it was feeding them to itself. The survivors tried the bridge, hoping to seize control. But the captain was gone, and the control panels were useless, buttons melted, wheels stiff as if part of the metal had fused into bone. Through the window, the ocean was pitch black, stretching without horizon. And far below, shapes moved, slow, massive shadows circling the hull, as if the sea's creatures waited for scraps. One crewman snapped. Claiming they were all already dead, he ran screaming down the corridor, calling Eliza's name. The others chased him but found only his shoes, placed neatly side by side in the middle of the hall. The carpet beneath was soaked. Then the ship itself began to change. Doors appeared where none had existed before, endless corridors branching into impossible angles. The survivors wandered for hours, convinced they were climbing upward, only to find themselves back in the engine room. Every wall seemed to pulse faintly like breathing. Some claimed to hear a heartbeat echoing through the steel. Worse still, they started doubting each other. The young woman swore she saw her husband whispering with a shadow that clung unnaturally to the wall. The sailor insisted one of the crewmen's faces had changed slightly, that his eyes were too black, his reflection absent in the brass railings. Soon arguments erupted, then violence, but the ship was always listening. Every scream, every sob seemed to echo through the halls, returning distorted and multiplied, until no one could tell whether it was their own voice or something else's. The breaking point came when they discovered the sealed stairwell leading down. At the bottom of the steps, water glistened, calm and still. The smell of salt and rust filled the air. Whispers rose up, dozens of voices blending into one, calling each survivor by name in a soothing, almost loving tone. They begged to go back up, but one by one the group descended as if pulled by invisible hands. Those who resisted were not spared. The ship groaned, the stairwell vibrated, and they were shoved forward by unseen force until their feet touched the water. The liquid was warm, thicker than seawater, almost like blood. And then from the darkness below, figures rose. Passengers, crew, all those who had vanished. Their eyes glowed faintly, their mouths moved in unison. It's safer here. It's warmer below. Stay with us forever. The sailor screamed prayers as the figures advanced, dripping salt water with every step. The young woman clutched her husband, sobbing. One crewman laughed hysterically, walking into the water willingly, and the stairwell sealed behind them, locking shut with a deafening clang. No one knows what happened to the last survivors, but some sailors claim that even now, if you sail near the Sargasso Sea, you might hear voices carried on the wind. Not just screams, but laughter, music, and the faint sound of glasses clinking in toast. The Starlight Mariner is still out there, drifting in twilight, a ship that isn't a ship anymore but a living, breathing organism, one that hungers, and when she finds you, no ocean, no sky, no God can save you. Because once you step aboard, you're already below deck. The few survivors who still clung to sanity tried to measure time by meals. But food had stopped coming. Kitchens were abandoned, pots filled with cold sludge that smelled faintly of seawater. When they searched storage rooms, they found crates rotting from the inside, crawling with translucent crabs that scuttled back into cracks in the walls. Some swore the crabs had human eyes. Hunger gnawed at them. Sleep became worse. Dreams were no longer private. Passengers reported waking up describing the same visions. Long corridors filled with water, figures standing in silence, and the sound of someone knocking gently from the other side of their skull. One elderly man gouged his ears with a fork just to escape the whispers. But even as blood poured down his neck, he said he still heard the voices, muffled and laughing. By the 12th night, the Mariner no longer resembled the ship it had once been. Hallways twisted like intestines, narrowing until survivors had to crawl. Cabins melted into one another, doors opening into staircases that led straight into ceilings. Every reflection showed something slightly wrong. Eyes blinking a second too late, mouths moving before words came. Shadows turning their heads independently. The young woman from the theater found herself staring into a bathroom mirror that didn't reflect her at all, but another version of herself standing ankle-deep in black water. The reflection raised a knife. She screamed, shattering the glass, but the cuts on her hands matched wounds from the mirror's other side. The ship wasn't haunted. It was consuming them, memory by memory, piece by piece, turning passengers into reflections of itself. One night, they found the grand atrium transformed. Where once marble stairs and gilded balconies had been, there now stood a massive spiral pit plunging into endless blackness. From its depths came a rush of warm air, carrying with it the stench of rot and brine. The walls pulsed, dripping with condensation, and from below came a sound that made every survivor collapse in terror. A heartbeat. Slow. Massive. Unstoppable. The realization spread through them like sickness. The Starlight Mariner wasn't just alive. It was growing, feeding on them to strengthen its heart. The sailor whispered an old legend that some ships were never built by men but birthed from the ocean itself, cursed wombs designed to lure the living inside. That the Mariner was not an accident of engineering, but a predator, dressed in steel and velvet to seduce prey. And now, it was birthing something even worse. The final days blurred together. Survivors wandered through impossible decks, each more nightmarish than the last. A lounge where all the passengers sat motionless, smiling, their bodies bloated and waterlogged, glasses raised in silent toast. A children's playroom where toys moved on their own, wet handprints smeared across the walls, and laughter echoed without source. A chapel where the priest's corpse stood upright at the altar, lips moving in a prayer that sounded like gurgling bubbles. Everywhere they went, the whispers followed. Below deck. Below deck. Below deck, the young woman lost her husband one evening. She turned her head for a moment, and when she looked back, he was walking calmly down a hallway that wasn't there before, holding hands with Eliza, the vanished stewardess. She screamed his name, but he never turned around. The hall sealed like flesh stitching closed, and she was alone again. The sailor vanished next. He claimed he saw his wife waiting for him at the base of the spiral pit, her arms open, her smile exactly as it had been 30 years ago. He ran toward her before anyone could stop him, plunging into the blackness. His scream never ended. By the 13th night, the survivors realized the truth. They hadn't been drifting aimlessly. The Mariner had been taking them deeper into the ocean, far below normal routes, into a trench where no maps existed. And at the bottom, waiting in eternal silence, was something vast, something that had birthed the ship, something the ship was returning to. Through the portholes, they saw it at last, colossal shapes moving in the abyss, mouths large enough to swallow cities, eyes glowing faintly through the dark. The ship tilted downward, descending into their domain like an offering. The whispers turned into a roar, filling every cabin, every vent, every skull. Welcome home. Welcome below. The deeper the Starlight Mariner drifted, the more its insides betrayed it. Walls no longer echoed like steel. They groaned like lungs. Passengers swore the wallpaper pulsed faintly, veins spreading under the patterns, pumping black liquid just beneath the surface. The chandeliers swayed though the air was still, their glass droplets dripping salt water that never touched the floor. It hovered inches above, like teardrops frozen mid-air. The survivors realized the ship wasn't decaying. It was transforming. The young woman woke one night to the sound of breathing. Slow. Heavy. Not from beside her, but from beneath her bed. Trembling, she leaned down. In the shadows, two pale hands gripped the underside of the mattress, and a face too bloated to recognize pressed upward, skin sloughing like wet paper. The eyes opened, white, lidless. It whispered her name in her husband's voice. She fled, screaming through the corridors, but the halls stretched endlessly. Each turn led her back to the same door, her cabin door. Only this time her own screams echoed from the other side. Meanwhile, the crewman who remained tried to force the lifeboats again. He pried one loose, ignoring the other's pleas, and lowered it with shaking hands. The boat touched the black water and drifted silently. For a moment, hope surged. Then something moved beneath the surface. Long skeletal arms, hundreds of them, rose from the ocean, fingers tipped with barnacle-encrusted claws. They wrapped around the lifeboat, not smashing it, but peeling it open piece by piece like cracking a crab shell. The crewman screamed until the sea filled his lungs, and when the arms withdrew, the lifeboat was whole again, perfectly intact, as though nothing had touched it. Only the faint sound of chewing lingered. The survivors who still clung to sanity gathered in the atrium, staring at the spiral pit that pulsed like a throat. The heartbeat shook the floor, stronger now, faster. From the depths came voices, not whispers but chants, hundreds of passengers calling in unison. "We are home. We are home. You belong below." The elderly sailor's face appeared among them. So did the missing captain. So did Eliza, her hair floating around her face as though she was submerged in invisible water. Their mouths moved in perfect synchronization, eyes fixed upward at the trembling survivors. The young woman collapsed, clawing at her ears. She swore she could feel water leaking from her skull, dripping down her neck. The remaining crewman shook her, desperate, but she pointed at his reflection in the polished rail. It wasn't his face. It was hollow, grinning, mouth open too wide, black water spilling from it in streams. That night, the ship shifted again, the deck tilted downward at a horrifying angle. Furniture slid, glass shattered, passengers screamed as the mariner lurched toward the abyss. Through the portholes, shapes emerged, gigantic silhouettes gliding in the dark. Teeth like jagged cliffs, eyes that glowed brighter than stars. The ship was descending not toward a grave, but toward a maw. The abyss itself was alive, and the mariner was its tongue. The survivors clung to railings as the PA system crackled one last time. A single distorted voice echoed through every speaker, deep and wet, layered with hundreds of tones. "This ship is not yours. It never was. You are part of us now. You are marrow. You are breath. You are below deck." The lights extinguished all at once. The only illumination came from below. A faint, sickly glow rising from the pit in the atrium, casting the survivors in shadow. They screamed, begged, prayed, but one by one, the glow swallowed them until silence reigned again. When dawn finally touched the ocean, the starlight mariner was gone. But fishermen still whisper of hearing laughter drift across the waves, faint music on nights when the sea is too calm, and sometimes, in the blackest hours before morning, they glimpse a luxury liner glowing faintly on the horizon, its windows alive with shadows dancing, its decks filled with pale figures raising glasses in eternal toast. And if you look long enough, you'll see her too, the young woman, standing at the rail, dripping, her mouth moving in endless prayer. Below deck, below deck, below deck. The survivors thought the terror had ended when the glow swallowed their screams. But the mariner was not done. Hours, maybe days, passed in timeless dark. The young woman awoke in her cabin once more, dry sheets beneath her, lamps glowing warmly. The ship hummed gently like nothing had ever happened. She staggered to the mirror, her reflection blinked a fraction too late. It smiled when she did not. Elsewhere, the crewmen paced the dining hall. Dozens of passengers sat at long tables, forks and knives scraping plates in perfect unison. No one spoke, no one looked up. They chewed endlessly, swallowing nothing. Meat bled across their plates, raw and steaming, though no kitchen served it. When the crewman touched a shoulder, the figure crumbled into wet ash, only to reform seconds later, identical, still chewing. He screamed into the silence, but the scraping of cutlery drowned his voice. On the promenade deck, the ocean no longer moved. The sea was glass, black and still, yet it reflected not the sky but another ship, an upside-down mariner sailing beneath the surface. Its deck swarmed with shadows, waving upward, beckoning. The young woman leaned closer to the rail, and her reflection leaned closer too. Only the reflection's eyes were empty sockets, and its mouth was a yawning void, seawater dripping endlessly. She turned to flee. Her reflection did not. It stayed at the rail, watching. At night, the survivors gathered again. The PA system played soft music, violins, elegant, serene, but threaded beneath the melody was the sound of drowning, choked gargles timed perfectly with every note. They begged to escape, but the ship had no end. Doors opened to identical corridors. Stairs led back where they began. The mariner was folding in on itself, and in its belly, something writhed. The atrium pit throbbed now like an open wound. From its depths rose pale figures dripping seawater, smiling serenely as they climbed the spiral stairs. They moved in silence, mouths closed, eyes glowing faintly blue. Each carried an object, a shoe, a locket, a hat, all soaked with brine. They placed the belongings gently at the survivors' feet, one by one. The young woman recognized her husband's wedding ring among them. It was warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. She dropped it. The ring crawled back onto her finger. By dawn, the Starlight Mariner had become unrecognizable. Decks sloped like ribs. The smokestacks curved like spines. The lifeboats dangled on ropes made of braided hair. And always beneath it all, the abyss yawned wider, gnashing with teeth big enough to dwarf cities. The survivors knew the truth. They were no longer passengers. They were blood cells in a body that would never die. Even today, sailors swear the Mariner still sails, not on the sea, but beneath it, dragging the ocean floor like a leviathan's tongue. Sometimes when the night is too quiet, a distant cruise ship horn echoes from nowhere. Sometimes lights flicker across the horizon where no ship exists. And if you answer that horn with one of your own, the sea grows silent, waiting, because the Mariner always hears. The ship had grown quiet. No more screams, no more footsteps, just the low, steady heartbeat that now pulsed through every wall. The young woman staggered through the corridors, desperate to find any trace of the world outside. Her nails tore at the doors, but the wood peeled back like skin, bleeding black water instead of splintering. When she pressed her ear to the walls, she heard not echoes but breathing, slow and steady, as though the entire vessel inhaled with her fear and exhaled with her despair. The corridors narrowed until she could barely move, pressing tighter with every step. Wallpaper pulsed against her face, warm and damp, until it felt less like a hallway and more like a throat. She gagged, shoving forward. But the ship swallowed her deeper, 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 until she burst through into the atrium once more. The pit yawned wider now, no longer a spiral but a chasm that split the ship's heart. From its edges hung pale figures, suspended like marionettes, their eyes glowing faintly. Among them she recognized her husband, his head lolling lifelessly as black liquid dripped from his mouth. His arms stretched toward her, whispering her name without sound. She screamed, but no sound left her throat. She realized with horror her mouth was no longer hers. It had sealed shut. Skin smooth where lips should have been, she clawed at her face, tearing flesh, but beneath was not bone. Beneath was steel, gleaming, cold, the ship's hull. Her arms stiffened, joints locking until her bones cracked and fused into polished railings. Her legs melted into the floor, toes stretching into long rivets that sank deep into the wood. Her skin blistered, split, and unraveled into shimmering wallpaper that rippled with each shuddering breath of the Mariner. She tried to scream again, but the sound came not from her throat. It came from the horns above deck. A low, mournful blare rolled across the endless sea, vibrating through every survivor, through every wall, through every reflection in the black water. She was the horn now. She was the call in the night. The last crewman watched in horror as the young woman's face vanished into the wall, her eyes glowing faintly from within the glass of a porthole. She blinked once, twice, and then the light stayed. Her gaze followed him wherever he moved until he realized with a shattering truth, every light on the ship was an eye, every railing was a bone, every cabin wall was skin stretched thin, every shadow on deck was a mouth. The Mariner wasn't consuming its passengers, it was becoming them. The crewman fell to his knees, trembling. He felt the floor beneath him pulse, felt it crack open as black water seeped around his body. He looked up, desperate for salvation, but the abyss gaped wider above him now, not below. Stars twisted into a spiral of teeth, the sky itself bending into a monstrous grin. And the last thing he heard before the water closed over his head was a chorus of voices, layered and endless, whispering in unison, "We are the ship. We are the sea. We are forever." Fishermen still whisper of the Starlight Mariner. They say if you listen closely on a windless night, the ocean's silence hides a horn's mournful cry, and if you look across the horizon, you might glimpse lights that blink like eyes watching. But don't stare too long, because the ship sees you, because the ship remembers hunger. And because one day when your reflection doesn't move with you, you'll know you're already on board. The ocean majesty was a floating paradise, gleaming chandeliers, casinos alive with laughter, pools glistening beneath the sun. For 5 days, everything was perfect. On the 6th day, the fog rolled in. At first, it seemed harmless, soft, silvery mist curling over the deck rails, muffling the sound of the waves. But by nightfall, the fog grew so dense that passengers couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The ship's horns groaned every hour, yet there was never an echo. The sea was gone. The sky was gone. Only the fog remained. Passengers whispered that time itself was breaking. The casino clocks all froze at midnight. Phones lost signal. Even the crew's watches ticked backward, then forward, then stopped entirely. By the third day in fog, no one could say how long they had been adrift. Food still appeared in the dining hall, perfectly prepared, steaming hot, but no one ever saw the kitchens working. Plates of salmon, bowls of soup, glasses of wine, all waiting in silence. Hungry passengers devoured it, though some swore the meat twitched between their teeth or that the soup rippled as if something alive was swimming just beneath the surface. Others refused to eat at all. They starved, pale and shaking, until one by one they vanished overnight. Their beds lay neatly made, their luggage untouched. Only a faint dampness remained, as though the fog had seeped into the sheets. The young couple in cabin 427 kept journals to cling to sanity. They wrote down every detail, the fog, the meals, the whispers they sometimes heard beyond their walls. But as days blurred, the journals began writing back. In the morning, new entries appeared in their handwriting, though neither remembered writing them. Don't leave the cabin. Don't follow the music. The fog isn't outside. It's in you. The couple stopped writing. The journals didn't. One night, faint music drifted through the fog, violins, mournful yet inviting. Dozens of passengers wandered out, drawn like moths. The couple followed, desperate to see others still alive. They reached the ballroom, where the chandeliers swayed in airless silence. And there they were, hundreds of passengers dressed in elegant gowns and suits, twirling across the dance floor in perfect rhythm. But their faces were wrong. Blurred, melted, as though painted in water and left to drip. Eyes slid across cheeks, mouths stretched sideways, features dissolving mid-step. The orchestra played with no instruments, bowing invisible strings. The music clawed into the couple's heads, vibrating their bones. When the husband tried to leave, the dancers paused. All at once, every faceless head turned toward him. Their mouths opened as one. The sound was not music, it was breathing. By morning, the ballroom was empty again. No dancers, no orchestra, only footprints across the floor that led straight into the walls and stopped. Passengers grew fewer. Some locked themselves away. Others walked into the fog and never returned. The couple clung to each other, but the husband began to change. His reflection in the cabin mirror lagged, smiling when he did not. He whispered things in his sleep, words in languages his wife didn't know. One night she woke to find him standing by the porthole, eyes glazed. His breath fogged the glass from the inside, though the cabin was cold. When she called his name, he turned. It wasn't his face anymore, it was hers. No one knows what became of the Ocean Majesty. Months later, a passing cargo ship reported seeing a cruise liner drifting silently in the fog, its decks crowded with passengers standing motionless, staring outward. They didn't wave, didn't shout, didn't move, just watched, their faces pale, eyes hollow, until the fog swallowed them whole again. Sailors say if you find yourself at sea and the mist thickens too fast, don't listen for music. Don't answer if someone whispers your name. And above all, don't look too closely at your reflection, because it might blink after you. The fog no longer drifted around the Ocean Majesty. It pressed against it, smothering every deck, every railing, every breath. Passengers who still remained alive noticed strange things. Their skin stayed damp even in locked cabins. The air smelled faintly sweet like rotting flowers, and when they tried to shout, the fog swallowed their voices instantly, leaving only a whisper that never carried farther than their own ears. One by one, memories began to fade. People forgot their cabin numbers, their names, their own families. A mother sat clutching her daughter, only to break down hours later because she could no longer remember if the girl was truly hers, or if the fog had placed the child in her arms. The young wife from cabin 427 became obsessed with the porthole. Every night she saw shapes moving in the mist, first faint silhouettes, then clearer with each passing day. Pale figures glided through the fog as if swimming, faces pressed against the glass with hollow eyes. When she screamed, her husband tried to drag her away, but she pointed at the glass with trembling fingers. The figures were smiling, smiling at him. The husband grew restless. His reflection no longer just lagged, it began acting on its own. When he brushed his teeth, his reflection spit blood. When he undressed, his reflection remained clothed. One night, while the wife sobbed in bed, he stood before the mirror, pressing his hand to the glass. The reflection smiled wide, stretched, and pulled him inside. He never came back out. Alone, the wife searched the endless corridors, her journal clutched tight. She begged the crew for help, but the crew was no longer the same. Their uniforms were spotless, their caps gleamed, but their faces blurred like wet paint. They moved in silence, tending to empty trays, mopping floors that bled water, opening doors to rooms filled with nothing but fog. She realized with horror, the passengers weren't vanishing, they were being rewritten. Days, or weeks later, she wandered into the ballroom again. The chandelier swung above, dripping fog instead of light. The faceless dancers still twirled, dozens, hundreds, each step perfectly in rhythm. But this time she recognized one of them, her husband. He spun in place, faceless like the rest, but his wedding ring glimmered faintly under the chandeliers. His hand extended toward her, inviting. She reached out, trembling, desperate to pull him back. The moment their hands touched, she felt her skin melt, sliding like wax. Her face softened, eyes stretching sideways, mouth dripping down her chin. She tried to scream, but only breath escaped, long, endless, hollow, and then she was dancing too. No one ever saw the ocean majesty again. But sailors swear that when the fog thickens suddenly at sea, they sometimes hear faint music, violins and waltzes drifting across the waves. If you're unlucky enough to sail into that fog, you might see lights ahead. A grand ship waiting, windows glowing gold, music spilling from its decks. But don't approach, because if you listen too long, your feet will move on their own. And once you step into the fog, you'll never stop dancing. The fog didn't just hide the sea, it devoured it. From the deck of the ocean majesty, no waves could be heard, no gulls, no wind. Only the faint hum of the ship's engines echoing against a suffocating silence. But the crew whispered that the ship wasn't moving anymore, that the compass spun endlessly, the radar showed nothing, and yet the engine still roared as if pushing through something thick. Not water, not air, something else. Passengers began vanishing faster. Families woke to find children gone, their beds perfectly made, small shoes placed neatly at the door as if they'd walked away willingly. In one cabin, a woman vanished in the middle of conversation, her laugh cut short mid-breath, leaving only a faint shimmer of fog curling in the chair where she had been sitting. By the 10th day in fog, only a fraction of the passengers remained, and none of them trusted each other anymore. The young wife clung to her journal, writing feverishly, desperate to anchor herself to something real. But the entries betrayed her. She would write, "I am alone in the cabin. My husband is gone." And in the morning, her own handwriting would read, "I danced with him all night. The fog loves me. It loves us both." Terrified, she tore out pages and burned them. The next morning, the journal was whole again. Every word restored, but written in dozens of different hands, some childlike, some ancient, some not human at all. The ballroom returned in her dreams first. She saw the dancers twirling in the mist, their faceless heads tilted back in silent joy. Then she saw them while awake, always in the distance just beyond the fog, their gowns and tuxedos fluttering as if underwater. The night she followed the music again, the ballroom was no longer contained within walls. It sprawled across the entire ship, chandeliers swaying in the mist, violins shrieking like screams. Every passenger was there now, dancing, even those who had vanished. Her husband spun toward her. This time his face had returned, but not quite right. His eyes were too large, too dark, his smile too wide, his skin shifting faintly like smoke beneath glass. He reached for her, and though every nerve in her body screamed to run, she stepped forward, helpless. When their hands touched, the fog surged into her body. She felt it rushing through her lungs, her veins, her thoughts. Her memories unraveled like wet paper, names dissolved, faces blurred. Even her own reflection slipped away, leaving only a hollow silhouette. And then she was smiling too, dancing endlessly. The fog thickened until the ocean majesty itself no longer looked like steel. Its hull rippled, glowed faintly, translucent like skin stretched too thin. If one stood at the rail and stared long enough, they could see hundreds of shapes moving within the walls, faces pressing against the metal, hands dragging along the glass, mouths silently opening and closing in rhythm with the violins. The ship had become the ballroom. The ballroom had become the ship, and the fog was the architect. Years later, sailors reported glimpses of a cruise liner adrift in unnatural mist, its windows blazing with golden light, music faintly audible across dead seas. They swore they saw figures dancing behind the glass, thousands of them spinning in endless circles. But when binoculars caught sharper details, the horror became clear. The dancers had no eyes. Their mouths hung open in eternal smiles. And their movements were not free, they were pulled like marionettes, strings of fog digging into their limbs. Those who looked too long never returned. Some ships that sailed into the fog were found drifting months later, empty, no crew, no passengers, just journals scattered across cabins, every page filled with the same sentence in countless hands. The fog loves us. We belong to the dance. Years passed. The Ocean Majesty was declared lost at sea. Families mourned. Insurance companies paid out settlements. The cruise line quietly erased the ship's name from brochures, replacing it with newer, shinier liners. But at sea, sailors never forgot. They whispered of the fog, a cargo vessel. Northwind was cutting across the Atlantic when the weather turned strange. No storm, no wind, just a wall of fog rising like a mountain stretching miles across the horizon. The captain hesitated, but the radar showed nothing unusual. Against his instincts, he pressed forward. The moment they entered, silence devoured the ship. No waves slapped the hull. No gulls cried overhead. Even the engine sounded muted, as though smothered. Then they saw lights, golden, glowing windows far ahead. A massive silhouette materialized in the fog, drifting silently. A cruise ship, pristine and alive, its decks blazing with chandeliers, its ballroom visible through towering glass walls, and behind the glass, hundreds of people dancing. The crew cheered at first, thinking they'd stumbled on a stranded liner, but as they drew closer, unease sank in. The passengers weren't moving freely. Their steps were mechanical, jerky, yet perfectly synchronized. Their faces gleamed too pale, too smooth, and their mouths were stretched into smiles too wide to be human. One sailor swore he saw his own mother's face among them, though she had died years before. Another dropped his binoculars, swearing the dancers were staring directly at him, their eyeless sockets following wherever he moved. The captain barked orders to turn away. But the ship no longer responded. The wheel spun uselessly. The engines roared, but the north wind drifted closer, pulled as if by invisible strings. The violins grew louder. The fog rolled across the cargo deck, seeping beneath doors, curling around ankles. Sailors collapsed, gasping as the mist pressed into their lungs, filling their throats. Some clawed at the air as if drowning. Others laughed, eyes rolling back as they stumbled toward the rail, arms outstretched like dancers waiting for a partner. One by one, they leapt. Not into the sea, into the fog itself. Their bodies vanished midair, swallowed whole, leaving only faint ripples of music in their place. The captain locked himself in the wheelhouse, trembling as the north wind drifted closer to the glowing cruise liner. He stared through the glass, heart pounding, as the Ocean Majesty loomed before him, and then he saw her, a woman in a wedding gown, twirling among the dancers, her face shifting in and out of focus. She stopped mid-step, turned, and raised her hand to him. Her mouth moved soundlessly, but the words burned into his mind all the same. "Join us." The captain blacked out. Weeks later, the Northwind was found adrift off the coast of Iceland, completely abandoned. No signs of struggle. No distress call sent. Cabins neat, equipment intact. The only clue was the captain's log, left open on his desk. Every page was filled with the same line, scrawled over and over until the pen tore through the paper. The fog loves us. The fog loves us. The fog loves us. Even now, sailors swear the Ocean Majesty still drifts inside the mist, a floating ballroom where time no longer exists and every dance step feeds the fog. They say if you hear violins across calm waters, turn away, because once you see the ship, it already sees you, and once the fog touches your skin, you're already dancing. The rescue teams who boarded the Northwind weeks later never spoke openly about what they saw. The official report claimed no survivors, But the divers whispered otherwise. Inside the cargo ship's corridors, the walls were dripping, not with water but with condensation that smelled of rot and iron. It was as though the fog itself had soaked into the steel. Every door they opened led to empty bunks, untouched meals, and footprints. Dozens of barefoot, wet footprints leading toward the upper deck. One diver swore the prints weren't human. Too long. Toes stretched unnaturally wide, dragging as though something had walked on broken bones. Another claimed he heard music in his earpiece, violins so faint yet so clear, even though the ship's power was dead. When they reached the bridge, they found the captain's chair turned toward the windows. His log was still on the desk, but the chair was empty, and carved deep into the leather were 5 fingernail marks, dug in with such force that blood still stained the armrests. Then one of the divers screamed, because outside the bridge windows, through the thick morning haze they saw it, the ocean majesty. Its hull gleamed as if freshly painted, its decks alive with people moving, laughing, twirling. Chandeliers sparkled, violins sang. But the divers realized something horrifying. The ship wasn't floating. It was suspended above the waves, its reflection missing from the ocean surface. The fog held it aloft like invisible chains, feeding it, keeping it alive. And every face on that deck turned at once, smiling down at them. That night, when the divers returned to their vessel, 2 never resurfaced. Their tether lines had gone slack in the mist, but no bodies were recovered. Their helmets were found days later, floating on the tide. Both helmets were filled with seawater, and with faint strains of violin strings echoing inside, as if the music itself had been trapped within. The survivors begged their superiors to abandon the investigation. The North Wind was left to drift, declared a lost vessel. Weeks later it sank without explanation, and yet, the fog remains. Satellite images occasionally capture it, a perfectly circular cloud, moving against the wind, drifting across the Atlantic like a predator stalking its prey. Fishermen who stray too close vanish without a trace. Tankers change course to avoid it. Entire yachts are swallowed, never to be found again. Some say the fog is no natural phenomenon. They say it is alive, an ancient hunger born when the oceans were young, wearing the ocean majesty like a mask, luring sailors closer with promises of safety, music, and light. Every dance step on its decks is a heartbeat it devours. Every laugh fuels its eternity. Every scream deepens the fog, and the sea, vast and eternal, keeps its secret well. So if you ever stand on a ship's deck at night and hear violins echoing faintly across still waters, do not look toward the fog, because the moment you recognize the music, the fog already knows your name and it is waiting. They thought these were just isolated nightmares. A woman disappearing without a trace in the first story. A ballroom turning into a prison in the second. A crew swallowed whole by shadows in the third. And now, a fog that hunts with a ship as its mask in the fourth. But when you stitch them together, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The sea is not empty. It never was. Mariners have long believed in monsters. Krakens, leviathans, serpents rising from the deep. Yet the real terror was never something with scales or tentacles. The real predator was older, faceless, nameless, something that wears ships like skin. It takes the form of liners, cargo vessels, yachts. It lures passengers with light, laughter, music. It feeds on their fear, swallows their memories, leaves only hollow vessels drifting like graves. Every story told at docks, every whisper in sailors' bars, every disappearance logged but never explained. They're not separate accidents. They are chapters of the same endless dance. The ocean doesn't forget. The ocean doesn't forgive. The ocean remembers. Somewhere out in the Atlantic, they say the fog still drifts. Sometimes it carries the shape of the ocean majesty. Sometimes it becomes the ghost of another lost liner. Sometimes it appears as a brand new vessel, gleaming, modern, irresistible. But always the same truth hides beneath. If you hear music over still waters, it's already too late. If you see lights through the fog, you've already been chosen. And once the sea takes you, no grave, no prayer, no God will bring you back. Because the ocean is patient, it is eternal, and it is hungry. And when you dream tonight, if you hear violins, don't open your eyes. For centuries, sailors have carved warnings into tavern walls, scribbled prayers on scraps of parchment, and whispered confessions to the waves before casting off. They all spoke of the same thing without ever naming it. The sea chooses. It decides who returns home and who becomes part of its endless story. Ships vanish not because of storms, but because the ocean wants them. Radios fail not because of static, but because voices are being smothered. And every lost passenger, every missing crewman, every vessel swallowed whole, becomes part of the fog's memory. Some survivors, those rare, broken few, speak of dreams that never leave them. They wake drenched in salt water, though their beds are dry. They hear laughter echoing from empty hallways. They see ballroom chandeliers swaying above their heads in the dead of night, though no ship is near. It is as if the ocean marks them, claiming their minds long before it takes their bodies. Scientists dismiss it. Governments cover it up. Cruise companies bury the stories under glossy advertisements. Yet deep down, everyone who sails knows the truth. The sea has no mercy. It does not care for prayers or technology. It does not distinguish between rich or poor, captain or passenger. To the ocean, they are all dancers waiting for the music to begin. And when the violins rise, they will take your hand. So when you close your eyes tonight, remember the 4 tales you've just heard are not myths. They are warnings, stitched together from the screams of those who never returned. The woman in white. The eternal ballroom. The ship that became a tomb. The fog that walks like a god, different faces, one hunger, one sea, because out there past the horizon the ocean still waits, silent, watching. And sooner or later it will call your name too. And when it does, no lighthouse will save you, no shore will hear you, and no dawn will ever come again. The ocean was never meant for us. It was ancient before we learned to crawl on land, endless before the first spark of fire touched human hands. To believe that it is only water and waves is the greatest lie we tell ourselves. The ocean is alive. It breathes in currents, dreams in tides, and hungers in silence. Every ship that sails is not cutting across its surface, but trespassing through its body. Every anchor that drops is a wound. Every light that pierces the abyss is an intrusion into a kingdom that was never ours. And the sea, patient, eternal, remembers every insult. That is why the missing never return. That is why some vessels drift back hollow, with meals still warm and decks still clean, yet souls gone like smoke in the wind. The ocean doesn't take without reason. It collects. The woman in the gown who stepped into nothingness. The passengers forced to dance forever in gilded halls. The crew that became shadows within their own ship. The fog that carries a ship like a mask of flesh. These are not coincidences. They are rituals. Offerings to a hunger too old to name. The ocean feeds not on flesh but on memory, on fear, despair, and the echoes of voices screaming into the dark. Bodies rot, souls fade, but memories linger, rich and endless, and the sea devours them to weave its eternal dream. Perhaps that is why survivors speak of hearing violins in their sleep, why they see ghostly decks above their beds, why their lungs taste salt when no water is near. The ocean does not let go. Once it has touched you, it owns you. It waits for the rest of you to follow, and when you die, the sea will be there, not to take your body, but to claim the final fragments of your fear. What if all the oceans of the world are not separate, but one living consciousness spread across the globe? What if every shipwreck, every disappearance, every whispered legend is simply its way of breathing? Think of it. The waves are its heartbeat, storms its rage, fog its fingers reaching out across the world. Ships are not lost, they are chosen. Their lights burn in eternal night. Their music fills the silence. Their passengers dance forever, feeding something vast and impossible, and the rest of us sail foolishly, pretending we are safe. So if one night you hear music across calm waters, or see faint lights in the distance where no port should be, do not follow. Do not even look. Because to look is to be seen, to hear is to be called, and once the ocean calls your name, you are already gone.